So the 11th Amendment should never have been passed. The 11th Amendment is just such horseshit. We have this incredible legacy where we got a constitution. Britain doesn't even have a constitution. And then we got the Bill of Rights. But we got the Bill of Rights a couple years after the Constitution. So the Bill of Rights wasn't guaranteed. It was promised, and then eventually they had to run for office, and then eventually we got the Bill of Rights. So it wasn't guaranteed that we were going to get all these freedoms. Freedom to petition, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom, the right to bear arms, right to not have soldiers in your house, right to remain silent, to be free from double jeopardy. So we get all these freedoms from the Bill of Rights. And then after we pass the 10 amendments, then the 11th Amendment comes up. And the 11th Amendment is to not protect the citizens, it's to protect the state. So it's not an individual right we're protecting the state. And we're protecting the state from who? And these are the individual states, not the state of America, but the individual states, the United States. We're protecting the states from being sued from foreigners of other countries and from foreigners of other states. Not from the citizens themselves. The citizens are allowed to sue their own state, but the citizens of other states cannot sue your state. So I'm in Colorado now. That means Australia, Canada, nobody can sue Colorado, nor can Tennessee, nor can Montana. That's the 11th Amendment. Verbatim. That's exactly the 11th Amendment. That the other people from other countries and the other people from other states cannot sue the state, your state. Colorado cannot be sued by anybody. That's the 11th Amendment. That's the great freedom that we're going to, the first freedom that we pick up after the 10 Bill of Rights. We barely got the Bill of Rights. And then the first thing America votes for is a ban on suing states to give states sovereign immunity so that the citizens can't ever sue them. That's the legacy of 1794 America. Yeah, well, fuck you, 1794 America. No wonder we got into the War of 1812 so shortly after the Revolutionary War. So let's go through the different decisions to where we got to where we are today. So the 11th Amendment comes right after the Chisholm decision. So you had the Chisholm decision. Alexander Chisholm, he was owed money from the state of Georgia because they had his estate had delivered goods during the American Revolutionary War to the armies of the state of Georgia. But the state of Georgia doesn't like to pay their creditors off. They don't want to pay their bills, so they stiffed Alexander Chisholm. So Alexander Chisholm, he was the executor of the estate of Robert Farquhar. And Robert Farquhar was a great American Revolutionary contractor. He's the best one ever in the history of contractors, but he never got paid. He never got paid. Then he dies, and then his estate goes to Alexander Chisholm. Alexander Chisholm sues in federal court to force the state of Georgia to pay the bills that was owed to Robert Farquhar. So that's the reason why it's called the Chisholm decision is because Alexander Chisholm was the executor of Robert Farquhar's estate. Now, Georgia, they don't want to pay their bills. They don't go to court. Then they say, well, hell, we got, sovereign immunity. We don't even have to listen to this shit. We don't have to... Right? So give 100% complete immunity to all 50 states is to give them absolute power. This is what the freedom-loving America, freedom-loving Americans would not have passed the 11th Amendment. So the John Jay Court of 1793, they got it right. In the Chisholm decision, the Supreme Court, they said that, yes, Alexander Chisholm can indeed sue the state of Georgia in order to get their money back. Of course they can, but for some reason we fuck over the troops all the time. Daniel Shays is a revolutionary soldier. He gets fucked over too. He loses his farm, he fights a revolution, and then they pass the entire Constitution to make sure that these revolutionary soldiers can't get their farms back. George Washington took all those land grants from the soldiers of the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, and then now Alexander Chisholm on behalf of Robert Farquhar, the greatest American revolutionary contractor ever in the history of contractors, is getting fucked over by the state of Georgia, but the Supreme Court says no, the state of Georgia must pay their bills. The service was offered to the state of Georgia, they didn't pay for it, so therefore they are open for being sued. And he was from South Carolina. So he was living in South Carolina. So this is a citizen from another state can sue the state of Georgia in order to recover the money. So that's the Chisholm decision. The Chisholm decision was 100% right. This is 1793 SCOTUS in a 4-1 decision in the John Jay court. So John Jay was correct when it comes to the Chisholm decision to rule against the state of Georgia and to rule against sovereign immunity. Now, right after the Chisholm decision, so 1793 says, yes, the citizens of other states, citizens from South Carolina can sue the state of Georgia in order to force Georgia to pay the bills, to pay what they owe. After the Chisholm decision, you got goddamn Caleb Strong, okay, so the notorious porcupine chaser of Massachusetts. Caleb Strong, this motherfucker, he's a pro-tyranny senator from Massachusetts. Immediately after the 1793 Chisholm decision, he puts the 11th Amendment forward, first in the House and the Senate, and then all the states. 10 states approved it in 1794, and then eventually 1798. Just in 4 years, the 11th Amendment was finalized as constitutional law. John Adams will declare the 11th Amendment as part of the 1789 U.S. Constitution. So this is pretty quick in terms of, getting the amendment put on the ballot. 4 years. So I don't know what was the propaganda or what the hell is going on, but essentially the 11th Amendment got shoved down the Americans' throats. They went ahead and endorsed the thing. And the 11th Amendment allowed citizens to sue the state. That's what the Chisholm decision says. So this doesn't change the power that a citizen can sue their own state, just that South Carolinians can't sue the state of Georgia. Other people, other citizens of other states and other citizens of other countries cannot sue the individual state. You don't live in the state, you live in another country, then you can't sue the state that you want to sue. You have to live in that state. You have to live in that state at the very least. That's the 11th Amendment. And the 1821 Supreme Court case had upheld that interpretation. So the 11th Amendment essentially leans towards sovereign immunity. It leans towards it, but it doesn't give sovereign immunity completely. The 11th Amendment specifically omits citizens who sue their own state, because clearly they could, they would. America would not accept that. Well, we can't even sue our own state. At first, the Supreme Court interpreted the 11th Amendment correctly, as allowing a citizen of one state to sue their own state, but forbidding citizens from other U.S. states and countries from suing your state. So the 1821 SCOTUS decision, this is, I'm not sure who the court is, but this is the Cohen's decision. You got two brothers who were in Virginia, and they were selling lottery tickets. Then Virginia files criminal charges against them, and then they file a court case in a federal court saying that the federal court allowed them to sell lottery tickets. So they're saying the federal law was the opposite of state law. And so you had the Cohen brothers, the two Cohen brothers who go around selling lottery tickets, which is kind of crazy. Just having individuals selling lottery tickets. And so they said that an appeal, okay, so first of all, they said that it was an appeal, so it wasn't a court case. It wasn't, one state wasn't being sued. So the 1821 Supreme Court is going to reject the challenge to their appellate jurisdiction to review a state court decision in a criminal case in the 1821 Cohen's v. Virginia court case. So Cohen's v. Virginia, 1821 SCOTUS, they said, at first, they said an appeal isn't the same as filing a civil suit against the state, so they could check out the appeals. So they were so concerned that, you can't sue a state, but can you rule on an appeal against the state? It was like, of course we can. SCOTUS says that since the two Cohen brothers were from Virginia, that if they had filed a lawsuit against the state of Virginia, that would have been permitted too. Nay, it would have been just fine and dandy under the 11th Amendment. It would have been just fine and dandy under the 11th Amendment. So the Cohen's decision said that the citizens of one own state can sue their own state. The 11th Amendment had omitted that portion to allow citizens of one's own state to sue their own state. It's very clear from the wording of the 11th Amendment. The 11th Amendment specifically mentions two groups of people that are banned from suing one's own state: other Americans in other American states and other people in other countries all around the world. So they omitted that a state's own citizen from the 11th Amendment means that sovereign immunity ends with a state's own citizens. Other citizens from other states and countries can't sue that state, but a citizen from that state can sue their own state. The whole concept of sovereign immunity is such bullshit anyways. If anybody has immunity for all time, that's absolute power. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So fuck the whole principle of sovereign immunity. Fuck the 11th Amendment. So Georgians, Hawaiians, Texans, they can't sue the state of Colorado, but Coloradans can. This is the 1821 SCOTUS decision of Cohen's v. Virginia. So in the Cohen's decision, they upheld the 11th Amendment. The 11th Amendment changed everything, but they interpret the 11th Amendment the way that I interpret it today. And the way I interpret it today is that a citizen can sue their own state. But guess what? After 1890, you're going to have a Supreme Court case called Hans v. Louisiana. So in the 1890 Supreme Court case, Hans v. Louisiana, the Hans decision, 131 U.S. 1, it established a modern doctrine of sovereign immunity. So it all come crashing down with the Hans v. Louisiana court case. Okay, so first of all, 1890, the Hans decision comes in 1890. That's light years away from 1798. When the Cohen decision came down, that was 1821. So the Cohen decision could understand more closely what was meant by the 1798 11th Amendment. So the 1821 Cohen's decision was just, about 20 years past the 11th Amendment. Now you have this 1890 decision, which is nearly a century after the passing of the 11th Amendment. So, yeah, who's going to understand the 11th Amendment? Somebody 100 years away or somebody 20 years away? So please, girlfriend, shut the front door. So they actually do, fuck over the American people. They say that the 11th Amendment plus the Supreme Court or plus the Constitution, they say that the doctrine of sovereign immunity is the whole point. That was the whole point. That's the reason why we established all this, so we could get away with all of our crimes. So the government has sovereign immunity, they could get away with all their crimes, and everybody's just fine and dandy with this. That's the 1890 Hans decision. So the 1890 Hans decision overturns the 1821 Cohen's decision. Cohen's had said that, people from Virginia, the Cohens lived in Virginia, so therefore they could sue Virginia. That was the 1821 Cohen's decision. They could sue Virginia for their right to sell lottery tickets. Now, the 1890 Hans decision is going to say the exact opposite. They're going to say not only do citizens of other countries and states they're banned, but also citizens of their own state. They're blocked. They cannot sue their own state. That's what these stupid old-ass, greasy, cheeseball-eating motherfuckers say. Now in 1890. So the 1890 Hans decision overturns the 1821 Cohen's decision. So, Jesus Christ, in the Hans decision, the Supreme Court just made shit up. And if the Supreme Court is just going to make shit up, then I'm going to interpret the 11th Amendment as meaning that we all get free cheeseburgers. Yep, nope, there's free cheeseburgers. Read between the lines. You can't sue that state, can't sue this. That means everybody gets free cheeseburgers, okay? That's what I'm going to, the Hans decision, the 1890 Supreme Court is going to go and make shit up. Then we all could just make shit up. The 11th Amendment is free internet for everybody and free college and free cheeseburgers. Fantastic. Look at me, I'm a Supreme Court justice. I'm just making shit up as I go. So what is the Hans decision, or what was the facts behind the Hans decision? You had a plaintiff, Hans, I guess it's a German, some German guy, ancestry of Germans, old Hans. He was a citizen of the state of Louisiana. He owned bonds that were issued by the state, so he owned state of Louisiana bonds. The bond and the stock markets, they're a little confusing to me too. So the state of Louisiana sells bonds to raise revenue. Eventually, Hans is going to get money from those bonds. That's the idea, at least. Then the state of Louisiana changes their state constitution, and Hans was worried that the bonds he bought from the state of Louisiana is going to be worthless. And so he filed a suit against the state of Louisiana, and the United States District Court asserting that Louisiana was impairing the obligations of a contract, which is forbidden by Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution. So Article 1, that's all the powers of the legislature. So per Article 1, Section 10, you cannot break a contract. That's the law of the land in America. You cannot break a contract. So for Hans, he sues the state of Louisiana for a possible breach of contract. He, believes that they're invalid or worthless, and so therefore he's suing. Okay, so the 1890 Hans decision, 1890 Supreme Court, 1890 SCOTUS, they said that Hans wasn't even allowed to sue Louisiana in federal courts because of sovereign immunity. Yeah, he was a citizen of Louisiana. Yes, that's his own state. But they said that he couldn't sue his own state of Louisiana for the constitutional changes that the government of Louisiana made, which rendered Hans's purchase of state bonds worthless. So that's fucking fantastic, right? State bonds, the state of Louisiana passes out these bonds. They say, hey, no, we're backing it with the good faith and credit of the state of Louisiana. We're selling you these bonds. You will get your money back and then some. This is an investment for you. So the people give up their money. They get these stupid, worthless state Louisiana bonds. And after they get this worthless state Louisiana bonds, Louisiana changes their constitution, renders all those state bonds completely without worth or without value. And so when the state of Louisiana has sovereign immunity, who the fuck can trust these state bastards to pay any of their goddamn contractors or their bills on time? So they can issue these state bonds and say that the state of Louisiana is going to back them and then, fuck the people over and then turn right back around and say, well, that's totally illegal. You can't sue us because we got sovereign immunity. So why would anybody buy state bonds from Louisiana? And since the Hans decision overturns the Cohen's decision, then that means the Cohens, they weren't allowed to sue in a federal court either. Even though they were citizens of Virginia, they couldn't sue Virginia. And even though Hans is a citizen of Louisiana, the 1890 Hans decision, the Supreme Court Hans decision, they said that he's not allowed to sue Louisiana. He can't sue them because, of the concept of sovereign immunity. Sovereign immunity isn't written into the Constitution. It's not written into, the language isn't there in the amendments. So sovereign immunity is not protected by the Constitution, but they assumed that it was. So they went ahead and added a principle, a legal principle, into our discussion, this national, this discussion we're going to have until the end of time. So they had sovereign immunity. So great job. Hans' decision is when the entire world crashed. After 1890, the America just doesn't have any freedom whatsoever. Sovereign immunity is the law of the land, meaning that all the states can't be sued by you stupid, goddamn citizens. So that's fantastic. We have a government that's based upon the consent of the governed, and then after we give them power, then they're like, nope, we get all the power, you ain't got no power, motherfuckers. So that's all that the United States Supreme Court in 1890 was saying. They were declaring that Louisiana could royally screw over their bondholders any goddamn moment they wanted to. They commit any crime. The state of Louisiana can steal, rob, rape. They can murder. The state of Louisiana can do every single crime against their own citizens, and the citizens are completely blocked from ever, they can't use violence against them, and they can't use the peaceful tactic of putting a lawsuit. So you're cutting down the options of what can the people do. If the state of Louisiana just takes your house, is there a way to fight that, or they get sovereign immunity, so we just have to accept all the crimes that the state does? The whole point of the rule of law is that everybody is supposed to be underneath the rule of law, but the Supreme Court in 1890 went ahead and gave them sovereign immunity, right? So that's nice. You got the three branches of government, and then you got one branch sitting there giving sovereign immunity to all the other branches. So, that's fantastic for the Supreme Court to tell the whole world that they are above the law and they have sovereign immunity and nobody can even sue, not the, government of America, but not any of the government of the 50 states either. So, Justice Joseph Bradley, he's going to write in the Hans decision, stupid-ass Joseph Bradley. He says that the states are always immune, the U.S. government's immune, all 50 states are immune, including the three branches. So they give themselves sovereign immunity, right? They're going to make all those damn plebeian peasants pay for their crimes, even the petty ones of contempt and disorderly conduct, speeding, not wearing their seatbelt. So anything that the citizens do, yeah, you can fuck them over. Whether they hurt anybody or didn't hurt anybody, who gives a shit? But we in government, we that have the power and the money in government, we get immunity over everything we do. Yippee! Yeah, right. Such great freedom-loving Americans. If Americans actually love freedom, then the 11th Amendment would have never been passed. So the 11th Amendment is half wrong because it takes the power away from our citizenship to be able to sue another state if they injured us. It's half wrong, and it omitted, allowed us to sue our own state, but the Supreme Court, by their decisions and by their interpretation of the law, they went ahead and stretched the 11th Amendment to something that it was never intended to do, at least not by the people that voted for it. Caleb Strong may have wanted it, but when they were talking about it in Caleb Strong's era, so the Chisholm decision happened, they had offered legislation that said they were going to bar the citizens from suing their own state too, but they rejected that, okay? So they intentionally rejected that, meaning that they knew that, that was a loophole. If they believed in sovereign immunity, they knew that the 11th Amendment did not cover citizens suing their own state. So, but first I'm going to give you an argument with the three branches of government. I fundamentally believe, okay, and if you don't believe my three branches of government theory argument, then, listen to why did we get to three branches of government. So, first of all, we got three branches of government. I feel like that kills sovereign immunity right then and there. So, it's not one state. We got three branches of a state, right? And none of the branches are immune to each other. They're there so that there's checks and balances. So, we have the judicial, the legislative, and the executive to have checks and balances. The point of the three branches of government is to stop tyranny. So if we are against tyranny, then we would allow the state to have immunity for any and all their crimes. So the principle behind the three branches of government is clearly we want to stop tyranny. So the sovereign immunity, assuming that there's sovereign immunity for the states, that's tyranny. That gives tyranny to this social construction of a nation-state. So because the state, the U.S. government and the states, they all have three branches, and that's considered genius because that's how we're stopping tyranny. We just fought a revolutionary war against the tyrant, King George III, a stuck-up aristocrat and his goddamn tyranny. So we were fighting against tyranny. We've been running America since its founding, and goddammit, we meant to keep on running it. So I feel that the three branches of government, because they have to check each other, they don't have sovereign immunity amongst themselves. So the judicial branch can check the legislative and the executive, and vice versa. Executive can check. So which one of these branches has sovereign immunity? They check each other. They check themselves. So to sit there and say that one branch can have sovereign immunity, nobody would accept that. Right? Well, the executive branch has complete immunity. No, there's three branches, so not the executive can't get sovereign immunity, not the legislative, not the judicial. They could try to assume it all, which is what they did, right, for the three branches. But the three branches would never accept that the other branches have sovereign immunity. So the three branches of government kills the whole notion that we have sovereign immunity. And again, if you don't believe that, the whole point of the three branches was to stop tyranny and to give anybody immunity. Just give baby, Huey. So we got a brand new baby. Huey is born. Let's give baby Huey immunity for anything and everything that they do. You can't charge him with criminal charges. You can't sue baby Huey. Just give baby Huey complete immunity. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. You give baby Huey immunity, maybe he'll treat us right. Maybe he won't, go around committing crimes and then, claiming immunity. Or maybe he'll be a piece of shit and just hurt as many people as he can and just say, well, I got immunity. So, fuck the whole idea of immunity. The three branches are not immune from each other's scrutiny. That breaks sovereign immunity as a general principle in American government, as formed by the foundational document, the U.S. Constitution. Now, the Hans decision, how they were able to get to where they got to, the Hans decision, which, basically fucked America over for all time. So they're going to mention Alexander Hamilton. So just because Alexander Hamilton wrote some shit in the Federalist Paper, number 81, it doesn't prove anything. That proves nothing. The Federalist Papers were just, they try to find the intent of the framers. What's the framers' original intent? They go to the Federalist Papers because that's how that was a propaganda of how they were going to get the Constitution passed. The Federalist Papers doesn't hold any legal authority, so you can read all the Federalist Papers. None of those are laws. They are just go back to what were the framers' original intent. I saw one framer who wanted to ban all state governments and just have one single federal government. So there's lots of different ideas during, back in that time. So there's, one of the framers said, let's abolish all state governments. Well, that's the opposite of sovereign immunity. That's saying that the state government has not unlimited absolute power, but they have zero power. They have no power. That was one suggestion during the time of the founding of the Constitution. Let's just wipe out all the state governments. So just because somebody give that, that opinion, I just don't feel there is no legal authority. Federalist Papers don't have any legal authority. So Alexander Hamilton, what he's going to write in Federalist Papers 81 is that the states have sovereign immunity. So the 1890 Hans decision, the Supreme Court back then, I guess Joseph Bradley. So old Joe Bradley is going to, read some shit that Alexander Hamilton had wrote 100 years ago regarding the U.S. Constitution. And I'm going to read it to you verbatim right now. Okay? It has been suggested that an assignment of the public securities of one state to the citizens of another would enable them to prosecute that state in the federal courts for the amount of those securities, a suggestion which the following considerations prove to be without foundation. It is inherent in the nature of sovereignty not to be amenable to the suit of an individual without its consent. This is the general sense and the general practice of mankind, and the exemption as one of the attributes of sovereignty is now enjoyed by the government of every state in the Union, unless, therefore, there is a surrender of this immunity in the plan of the Convention, it will remain with the states, and the danger intimated must be merely ideal. The circumstances which are necessary to produce an alienation of state sovereignty were discussed in considering the article of taxation, and need not be repeated here. A recurrence to the principles there established will satisfy us that there is no color to pretend that the state governments would, by the adoption of that plan, be divested of the privilege of paying their own debts in their own way, free from every constraint but that which flows from the obligations of good faith. The contracts between a nation and individuals are only binding on the conscience of the sovereign, and have no pretensions to a compulsive force. They confer no right of action independent of the sovereign will. To what purpose would it be to authorize suits against states for the debts they owe? How could recoveries be enforced? It is evident it could not be done without waging war against the contracting state, and to ascribe to the federal courts by mere implication and in destruction of a pre-existing right of the state governments a power which would involve such a consequence would be altogether forced and unwarrantable. So that's why we can't sue the state of Georgia to make sure they pay their bills, because, just give all the power to the states. Yeah, okay, so no power to the people, no power to the citizens, all power to the states, just like the framers had intended. So, yeah, can anybody really make any sense out of this drunken, random dribble? So the states get complete supremacy because, you know what, it would be very inconvenient if they had to pay their bills. If other people and actors had to make them, then there's a possibility of war. No. If the state of Georgia wants to rob their own citizens, that's the right of the state of Georgia to do. So essentially what Alexander Hamilton, he wouldn't even, need not be repeated here. He's a stream of conscious, all over everybody's faces, just streaming his consciousness all over everybody's faces without a word processor, right? Just coming up with this and that. So Alexander Hamilton, he wanted sovereign immunity. He was for a strong national government. Alexander Hamilton is actually, when it comes to his views, he was an American revolutionary, so he was a soldier, but then his viewpoints essentially was a state sovereignty. He wanted a monarchy. He wanted an elected monarch, an elected dictatorship. And so essentially he liked the king and the king's power and giving all the power to the state. Essentially he was for the principle of democracy, in essence, but once the elections were over, then the government, I guess for longevity, but he wanted George Washington to become King George IV. So Alexander Hamilton would have been okay if, after George Washington was elected to be president that first time, if he would have been president for the rest of his life. So he's okay with, these kings and these elected monarchs being imperialists for life. He also wanted to sink our nation into collective debt as a way to unify the country. So yeah, Alexander Hamilton, what a great fucking guy, right? Such a great guy. He wanted to turn our democratic republic into, as much as possible, a dictatorship. So he wanted to turn the election process, okay, the people got to vote, but he's also the one that come up with the Electoral College. So they're just trying to remove the citizen completely. This is supposed to be a democracy. It's supposed to be a republic. And yet when they form the Constitution, they want to give sovereignty